Alrighty then. Time for another episode of Shattered Legacies Deep Dive. In today's episode, we're going to be covering the Demon Legions as well as the Demon Realm. This is another one of our factions. I know I say this frequently, that this is going to be a long one, but honestly, I think this one might be a fairly long one. There's a lot to cover, and it's not really something that is touched on too frequently within Shattered Legacies as a whole. Not only that, but there are a lot of different entities in here, and I could do their own deep dives, but they'd be very short, so I think we're just going to do pretty much a comprehensive cover. Obviously it's not going to be every single micro detail. That would take far too long. But, so, what is the Demon Legion, and what is the Demon Realm? Well, you can think of the Demon Legion kind of like the Covenant from Halo. It's basically a massive group, or a massive amalgamation of various different species that all serve under a singular banner, this specific banner being the, Demon Legion. Some of them are fairly iconic demons, we have imps, succubus, stuff like that. Whereas we also have more unique types of demons. Now, what is the Demon Realm specifically? Well, the Demon Realm is a stable pocket dimension. Or, what was the exact word I used? Well, regardless, it's basically, we had covered it in the one of the first videos where we talked about the different, state of space and stuff. If you give me a second, I can quickly look it up on my YouTube. Come on, load. This is going to be the one time that it's not going to load, is it? Videos. Right, it was the one that was the state of reality. But anyway, this wasted far too much time there. It's basically an infinite realm that exists, basically like the concept of hell itself, as this kind of what the Demon Realm is. It's basically biblical hell, or I guess a better idea is doom hell, and it's basically the location that all demons exist in. Now, there is a very important thing that we need to know, and that is the difference between actual demons and denizens of the demon tribe. The Demon Legion. The Demon Legion as a whole is what exists within the demonic realm, or I guess we could just simply call it hell. And like I said, it's basically like Shadow Legacy's version of the Halo's Covenant. It's a lot of various different species that all are largely quote-unquote demonic that serve under the banner of the Demon Legion. However, there are actual demons, and they're specifically known as the Demon Tribe. Now, we haven't really gone over a lot of the minor species that exist within Shadow Legacy, because there is a lot of them. Everything from the humble kobolds and beast folk all the way up to orcs, and more specifically, elves. There are 3 different types of elves. There is your standard run-of-the-mill elf, very pompous, they believe far too highly in themselves, not nearly to the level of, say, Warhammer 40k Eldar, but they definitely believe themselves to be superior. The second type of elf is the snow elves, otherwise known in Shattered Legacies as the Fae. Now, I am aware what a Fae actually is. I believe it is Scottish mythology. It is known as the Fair Folk or the Fairies. These are not the same thing. When we say the Fae in Shattered Legacies, we're specifically talking about the Snow Elves. Now, your generic elf, they're everywhere. You can find them everywhere. They're very prevalent within the Siritan Empire, although the Siritan Empire is primarily just Siritans themselves. There is a lot of other minor species that exist within it. Snow elves are incredibly rare to find. They're oftentimes only found on winter taiga-like planets. And they oftentimes exist inside of forests that are protected by incredibly ancient magic that even some of the strongest mages within the Civitan Empire can't hope to compete with. And it basically keeps their tribes and their villages secret. How exactly they've spanned multiple different planets is unknown. However, they're all pretty much genetically identical. This means that the Fae are incredibly difficult to find. It's basically like winning the lottery if you can find one. And if you can find an actual tribe, especially one that lets you in, you won the lottery of a lifetime, you know? You won so much money off of the lottery that for generations, they're going to be sitting nice and pretty, like royalty, you know? The final elf type are the Dark Elves, specifically known as the Drow, D-R-O-W, Drow. And the Drow are insanely rare. We just got done talking about how incredibly rare it is to find one of the Fae. The Dark Elves are even more difficult to find. Now, it should be noted that they're not Dark Elves like from Elder Scrolls, you know? The Drow are a bit interesting as they have a normal skin complexion or skin coloration like that of Ciritans, which is they're predominantly white, but there's this ever so subtle gray hue to their skin. This is very prominent with Ciritans because Ciritans are largely, actually solely, genetically augmented species. They're so far into augmenting themselves that evolution doesn't really have any sway over your average Ciritan. Evolution won't start making modifications to the Ciritan form because they're basically, at this point, essentially synthetic creatures, I guess is a good way to put it. You know, they've modified themselves so much with so many different unique organs and all that kind of stuff that evolution doesn't really know what to do with it, so they kind of just doesn't touch the Ciritans. But anyway, the Drow are kind of the same with their skin color, is that it's primarily white in color, but it has this kind of ashy gray color to it. And this is going to sound super edgy because it's used a lot. They also have red eyes. Now, I'm not talking about like blood red eyes, you know, of like your typical demon, you know, like you think of a demon, you think of a horned abomination that looks like a goat with burning red eyes. It's more of like a salmon color, actually, now that I think about it. And the reason that they're so rare is because ancient dark elves had committed an unidentified sin way so long ago that there is no written history. Like, the Ciritans have nothing, the humans have nothing, the Bastilians have nothing. Nobody knows what the sin was. But apparently it was solely within the elf tribes of the total of 3. The Drow somehow committed some ultimate sin within the elves and were banished to a small pocket dimension that is capable of maintaining its own cohesion. And basically on the inside, it's basically like a singular planet, and the planet is in perpetual twilight. The ground, no matter where you go on the planet, is scorched, meaning that it's not capable of raising any crops. It's not fertile whatsoever. It isn't actually capable of growing anything other than what a type of tree that basically looks like the tree is dead. It's known as witchwood. And the entire planet is filled with apex predators that primarily hunt the Dark Elves. As a result, Dark Elf tribes within this pocket dimension, which can't be accessed by anybody other than elves themselves, they have no reason to go there, it's very rare to find Drow anywhere on this planet, but they do exist. They do somehow live on this absolute nightmare hellscape that is their punishment. And the thing is that the drow are very much resentful of all other creatures that don't live on that planet. I mean, they're resentful of the creatures that are on that planet, don't get me wrong, but it's basically when one of them gets out, and there's not really a known way for drow to get off of their little pocket dimension planet and into mainstream reality. It's happened a few times, but nobody can figure out how, as they don't have access to whatever weird elvish magic that they use to stick the drow in there in the first place. And usually when a drow manages to get out of the demon plane, as it's known, they basically just go on like murder sprees, like serial killing, and just they keep on going until they're finally brought down, simply because they just have so much fury towards all other species for basically the fact that, you know, you're sitting out here living the good life while I'm on quite literal Twilight hell planet over there, and like why can't we have good things, you know? And so the drow ended up getting the nickname the Demon Tribe, because they were essentially seen as demons by everybody else, because they would literally do that. The one of them would manage to escape, and it would just be a barbaric slaughter until finally the drow could be taken down. The important thing to know about the three elf tribes is this. Normal elves, your standard generic elf, their physiology specializes in agility. They're very good sort of like assassins or spies, because they're capable of getting in and out very quickly, and despite the fact that they're slightly taller than your average Siritan, which is about a good foot taller than your average human, they're very sneaky and stealthy, which means that they can get in and out without being noticed and do it very quickly and do whatever it is that they need to do. The snow elves are more attuned with magic than anything else, and this is probably why they possess magical barriers that protect their villages. The drow, on the other hand, specialized specifically in fire magic, I know, cliche, as well as just being unnaturally durable. You know, they take a lot of damage before they go down. And their physiology wouldn't suggest it, because all three elven species, they look like your standard stereotypical elf. You know, very tall, very thin, willowy. You know, they don't really have a whole lot of muscle mass. You know, it seems like they primarily focus on things that don't require physical exertion. But the drow are just unusually tanky. And thus, even with the Siritan Empire's hyper-advanced technology, it can take a lot to take down a drow. Now, luckily, they almost never get out of the demon plane. How the ones that do manage to get out is completely unknown. So with all that out of the way, we can actually go into the Demon Legion itself. Now, there are a lot of different species. I'm not going to go into every single species, because some of them were largely utilized, like I said before, if I were to ever make this an episode, there are some Demon Legion species that would be used in one episode and one episode alone as sort of a plot twist, you know, but that's it. You know, they're not common Demon Legion members, you know, and that's what we're really going to be going over. Now, the most prevalent member of the Demon Legion is the Impling. These are incredibly small creatures that look like your standard imp. They're only about I gotta think of what numbers I assigned to each of them. I think I had assigned them to be like only 2 feet tall. Like, they're very small, they're very weak, they have a natural affinity to earth magic, interestingly enough, but it's not really, you know, it's basically like your basic earth bending from Avatar: Last Airbender. You know, they can levitate a rock and they can shoot the rock at you, but they're not going to necessarily be causing earthquakes and like mountains to split apart or slam together. It's that kind of stuff. It's not powerful. It's very basic, rudimentary. If you have any affinity for magic, odds are that your magic is going to be able to overpower one. But that's not the purpose of them. Their job isn't to deploy magic, their earth magic, on enemies. It's more so used as a utility for any situation they may run into. They're your trash mob. Basically, they're cannon fodder because they reproduce in insane numbers. Like, literally insane numbers. So, we'll get to it a bit later, but the way that a demon legion invades a world is via what is known as a Hell's Gate. And depending on the size of Hell's Gate, if it's a relatively small one, you might get a couple of 10 every single, like, second or two. But some of the proper big ones, it can literally disgorge thousands. Sometimes even for the really fucking big Hell's Gates, millions of implings per second. Like, just fucking tidal waves of implings. And again, they're very weak. They can't really survive all that much, like with the Saracen Empire, because we're primarily looking at it as like from their perspective. They have access to things like plasmite, soulstite, and even coming out with antimatter weaponry, and that's just like overkill for an impling. You could take just like a modern day 9mm and just hit them anywhere, and that's enough to take out an impling. You don't require incredibly high powered technology to kill them. However, you do need incredibly high powered technology to deal with swarms of them, things like artillery and stuff, because it's like dealing with 40k orcs, but instead of them being like 9 feet tall of just insane muscle mass, they're just tiny. They're puny. They don't take a lot of damage. They're easy to kill, but there's just fucking insane amounts of them, And these are considered to be lesser demons. The majority of demons within the Demon Legion are either lesser or greater demons. We're specifically starting at the lowest and going to the highest. So we have lesser demons in the form of implings. Next up, we have your standard lesser demon. And, this is exactly what you imagine it to be. It has red skin, horns on its head. It might have goat eyes, irises, and might not. It's your stereotypical demon. And when it comes to the Demon Legion, they tend to generalize a lot of the different species. Like, for example, imps. More akin to, like, doom imps. Those are just considered demons. Lesser demons. And so, as a result, the Saracen Empire characterizes imps as their own specific species, but within the Demon Legion, things like imps, succubuses, and all of the other, like lesser demons, they're simply just known as demons. Now, obviously, I will be going over a few of them, such as the imp. Imps are slightly smaller than your standard human. They are roughly on the same level of durability, quote unquote, meaning that they can take some decent damage, just like a human can, but they can be incapacitated fairly quickly. They rely on sheer agility. They are incredibly fast. They don't really have an innate specialization in any type of magic. It's not like they're like Doom imps, how they have the obvious affinity for fire and they just throw fireballs at you. It's just they have a low level influence over magic, but it's largely either your standard demonic magic such as curses and hexes and stuff, or just outright archaic magic, simply because they can't muster anything greater than that. Now, to be fair, we've talked about it before. Archaic magic is available to mostly everybody. And it's useful in a lot of different situations. And in some situations, it can even be incredibly powerful. But when we're talking about in the hands of an imp, not super powerful. Now, I know you guys are probably wondering about this one. I had alluded to it like 2 or 3 times now. Succubus. Now, I want to make it known it's not the type of succubus you're thinking of. It's not the type of demon that has adult wrestling, I guess we can put it in a very PG way, basically sex, with a male and then steals their soul. It's not that type of succubus. Succubuses are, when it comes to Shattered Legacies, they're far more focused on the idea of charming either gender, whether that be male or female, and basically making them into sort of thralls. Now, it should be noted that there are multiple different types of succubus. One of the rarest succubus is the devourer succubus. And basically, it's a succubus that is basically like hardcore cannibalism. But the interesting thing about them is that they are significantly more powerful. They're basically like succubus royalty. Like, if you're a devourer succubus, you're basically royalty, you know? And it's the cliche with magic, you know, how the commoner doesn't have very good magical capabilities, but the noble or even the royals have just fucking insane magical capabilities. It's kind of the same way, you know? Your average succubus, they're capable of charming either gender, but if it's an individual who has a particularly strong sense of willpower, it has a far less likely that the charm ability is going to work against them. Whereas something like a devourer demon, they're capable of charming too, and it's basically guaranteed unless you're enhanced in some way, like mentally, or even just like indoctrinated in some way, kind of like Warhammer 40k Astartes are. Like, that's really the only way that you're going to survive. But an important thing about specifically the Devourer Succubus is that every individual that they devour, they gain something from that individual. It's not just the cliche, oh, they become more powerful. They kind of do, but it's not like, you know, okay, I just ate this random guy named Joe. I am now 5% stronger, you know? It's not that type of situation. It's more of a specific key facet of that individual is taken and then applied to the Devourer demon. As a result, their appearance can vary wildly. And the important thing about Devourer demons is that they're not just blood-crazed psychopath cannibals just running around and killing everybody. It's more so like, I can't remember his name, but the gourmet from Tokyo Ghoul, I think it's called, the anime. It's more of a situation like that. They hunt down specific individuals that have traits that are desirable to them, and then they will hunt and then consume that individual to gain whatever trait that it is that they want. And they are capable of choosing what specific facet from that individual they're taking. And it's not necessarily just physical either. If they manage to kill an individual who has particularly powerful magic or even a unique type of magic, they can gain access to that as well. Even things as esoteric as just general intelligence or knowledge. You know, if a devourer succubus for whatever reason wants to know how to make an AC unit, they can go and kill a guy who makes the AC unit, and now they understand the fundamentals of how the AC works, you know? So they're capable of taking on, importantly, a singular trait, and it's a very specific trait. It's not something that can just be generalized, like, oh, I want to know all of the knowledge about every single vehicle humanity has ever had. No, it's more so like, if you want to learn about a car, you have to choose a specific model from a specific company of car. You know, you can't just be like, I want to learn every single car. No, it's like, you have to specifically learn the Shelby or the Lamborghini. You know, it's one or the other, and you can't have both. You can only have one. Next up, we can go to greater demons. Again, it's sort of the same situation with standard demons when it comes to the lesser demon archetype. It's a lot of different species that are kind of just thrown together and called greater demons. And when we're specifically going over these, we're specifically looking at from the perspective of the Demon Legion, which is why I didn't really give a lot of examples of what different demon types were in the lesser demons. An important thing to know is that the Devourer demon is considered to be a greater demon, a Devourer succubus is considered to be a greater demon, despite the fact that the majority, if not all other succubus subspecies, are considered to be lesser demons. There is also a demon, and you may recognize this name. It is not a rip from Terraria. There is a demon known as the Red Baron. The Red Baron is again, like a lot of other demons, bipedal. It has a set of wings on it, but it's very muscular. Like, almost to, like, a normal level of muscular, but almost to, like, a grotesque level. You know, like, it's a normal amount of muscles that, like, a bodybuilder in the human race would have, but it's almost to a grotesque proportion, you know, grotesque detail and definition of those muscles, you know, and they're basically just used as basically quite literally living meat shields. You know, they're incredibly tanky, which means that any demons that aren't something like an Impling, it's their job as kind of like bodyguards. You know, it's basically like, you know, I could choose Billy Bob and his 3 cousins over there to cover me. I could have this, you know, this bodyguard firm, or I could have like members of ex-military cover me. You know, Red Barons are like that private security company. You know, they're not quite ex-military, but they're not Billy Joel and his 3 cousins out in the backwoods. Just such a fucking, why did I go there? Anyway, specifically what I want to get to is the higher level demons. And after the greater demon, we have archdemons. Now, this is where we start having problems. When it comes to lesser demons, the majority of them, your unaugmented, unpowered common soldier is capable of taking them out. And what I mean by unpowered is, you know, they obviously don't have access to divine power because they're not a god, but they don't have access to natural physical abilities, they don't have access to magic, and they don't have access to psionics. You know, they are unpowered, and they're not augmented in any way. You know, basically like members of your standard armed forces nowadays, which in the Siritan Empire is known as the Siritan Royal Army. You know, you're capable of taking out lesser demons. When it comes to greater demons, you really do need specialized individuals who are specifically tailored to deal with that greater demon level, or just outright calling in super soldiers, which, again, is like Siritan Marines, Siritan Marauders. Siritan Keepers were actually, their intended purpose, aside from just being hyper-focused on magic, was actually anti-demon. They were designed to be a counter towards demons, specifically greater demons, you know, and there's also Hellsings and a few other super soldiers the Siritan Empire has made. When we get to archdemons, that's when things become a problem. The standard military and super soldiers isn't capable of handling something like an archdemon. Now, luckily, archdemons are fairly infrequent, but they are incredibly powerful. This is oftentimes when you have to have specialized members of the Siritan Natural Disasters come in, and this is basically, the Natural Disasters is the Siritan Empire's Mages Corps. You know, they basically took mages and militarized them, and it's known as the Natural Disasters. They're quite powerful. They're not necessarily on the same level as, say, an actual natural disaster, like a tornado, a hurricane, or an earthquake. But they are very powerful. But it oftentimes requires high-ranking members of the Natural Disasters that are kind of used to fighting archdemons, or demons in general, you know. These are where you start seeing the heavy hitters, things like Pit Fiends and Cerberuses. Now, Pit Fiends are incredibly big, incredibly massive, very muscular, but to a more appealing level when compared to the Red Baron. They have a natural affinity for hellfire. Now, When it comes to fire, magic in general, there are a lot of different iterations. I'm not going to lie. There are a lot of different iterations. You have standard fire, you have hell fire, you have inferno fire, you have demonic fire, you have incendiary fire, which sounds kind of stupid. You even have the pinnacle in molten magic. There are a lot of different, and that's just like a general idea of all the different types of fire magic. That's not all of them. But hellfire and demonic fire are specifically for the demon legions. Demonic fire is largely only utilized by the demon tribe, i.e. the drow, the dark elves, whereas hellfire is largely only utilized by high-ranking demons such as archdemons and higher ranks. That's very pretty. Sorry. Hellfire can best be described as a sort of like a violet-ish red flame that is basically almost like napalm. You cannot put the stuff out, whether that be through mundane means or magical means. It just burns, and it keeps burning until there is nothing left. And as a result, it's a very big problem. Like, the only reliable way of dealing with hellfire is either shields or magical wards, or even using the power of divinity from gods, which is very unlikely. And that's about it, honestly. Like, hellfire is very difficult to deal with. Pit fiends are fast, they're incredibly strong. Like, they can take your average man or your average Certain and, like, with barely any effort, just rip the dude in half at the stomach. Like, give me 1 second. This is going to be really weird for you guys, but I got to pause quick. Alrighty, and I think I'm back. Let me just quickly window. Yep, I am back. Okay, perfect. We got a keybind set up now. Isn't that fancy? Anyway, I think I had just gotten done talking about the Pit Fiend. The other demon that I had mentioned was the Cerberus. And Cerberuses, or Cerberi, or however the hell you want to say that, they're a problem. There are 3 different species of Cerberus. There is the standard Cerberus, there is the infernal Cerberus, and then there's the final one known as the Apocalypse Cerberus. Now, thankfully, the standard Cerberus is only an archdemon rank. Unfortunately, the standard Cerberus is an archdemon rank. Cerberuses, for those who don't know, are massive 3-headed hellhounds. They are absolutely monstrous, depending on which one you know, or depending on which fantasy you're talking about. The Cerberuses in Shadow Legacies, at least the standard ones, stand at around a 2-story building height. However tall that is, I don't know offhand. And that's from the base of their paws to their shoulders. That's not counting the tops of their heads either. That would probably be another good half story at that. But, Cerberuses are very, very resilient to the majority of forms of damage. And despite only being ranked as an archdemon, they oftentimes require individuals stronger than those that normally handle archdemons. Cerberuses are very durable, which means they require insane levels of firepower. Now, if we're talking Certain technology, Solstite and Plasmite weaponry would have a very suboptimal effect. It would require constant saturated fire, and during a demon invasion, the Cerberus is oftentimes the least of the soldiers' worries. Usually their biggest worry is literally the continental swarms of implings that are coming towards them. However, Cerberuses basically stand like Imperial Warhammer 40k Imperial Knights and Titans on the battlefield. Cerberuses, as a general rule, are insanely rare. Not only is it rare for a being of that size to even be created, but like the successful birth rate of a Cerberus is like astonishingly low. Like they're incredibly rare. And the majority of them are in fact the standard Cerberus. Aside from being incredibly durable, they are unusually agile. Like they're capable of moving way faster than their size would indicate. They are absolutely titanic, but they can get up to a good dead sprint of like 90 miles an hour. Like they are fast. Now it takes them a while to get to 90 miles an hour, but they're fast. They can easily dodge like incoming artillery rounds and stuff like that. Not only that, but they have a natural, incredibly high affinity towards hellfire magic. And they're capable of largely utilizing this in essentially incredibly condensed, almost like laser beam that they're capable of firing from their mouths. And keep in mind, like the majority of fantasy Cerberuses, each head has its own mind and its own personality. They can even communicate with one another without making any vocal noise, as they're kind of just capable of naturally understanding what the others are thinking about. So you literally have one that is biting at dudes that are near it, one that is scanning the battlefield and kind of assessing what's around it, and the third one could literally just be firing that hellfire laser beam sort of thing from its mouth, annihilating anything that's in front of it. Now, the infernal Cerberus is a whole different problem. Now, when we get beyond archdemons, we get to demon lords. And demon lords are a major problem. So within the Civitan Empire, when it comes to their more hyper-specialized magic users, you have the natural disasters, which is basically the Civitan Empire's Mages Corps. Beyond that, you have the high-ranking natural disasters, and these are people who are usually on the level of actual natural disasters. They're capable of casting spells that are as destructive as, say, like an earthquake or a tsunami or a hurricane. They can do some fucking damage. Beyond them are the top 5 Civitan natural disasters, otherwise known as Civitan calamity candidates. And these are the guys that really bring some insane, it's like if high-ranking natural disasters are a stick of dynamite, the Civitan calamity candidates are like a nuclear bomb. And then the proper Civitan calamities are a sun's supernova. That's kind of the difference in power scales we're talking about here. Obviously, a high-ranking natural disaster doesn't have the same destructive power as a stick of dynamite. But you get the idea of what I'm saying here. They are vastly superior to a high-ranking natural disaster, which are oftentimes deployed to deal with archdemons. When it comes to demon lords, you oftentimes require the focus of a calamity candidate. Unfortunately, there's only 5 of them, which isn't much better when you think of the calamities, which there's only 8. So when a demon lord becomes accessible to mainstream reality, it requires the attention of a calamity candidate. And there are a total of 5. We'll get into them when we do actual calamity candidates and calamities in general, but there are 5 of them, and they are incredibly powerful. The Infernal Cerberus is counted as a Demon Lord rank. Now, Demon Lords, I guess I should go to Archdemons. Archdemons are basically like your captains, They're in charge of groups of lesser and greater demons. And then you have your demon lords, which are basically like your generals. They're the ones that have overall command. They're incredibly powerful, large, and in charge. And they will make sure that you know that. you know, and the Infernal Cerberus has basically the same structure as a standard Cerberus, but they're far larger. They're like twice as big as your standard Cerberus. Not only that, but they have these ugly, absolutely nasty looking tentacles all over essentially their ankles. And these tentacles are capable of elongating themselves, and basically what they utilize them is for basically the impalers from Helldivers 2. That's what they are. You know, they burrow into the ground and they either erupt out of the ground, instantly impaling things as they come out, or they come out as giant tentacles like the impaler and slam the tentacles down. And basically, they are a close range form of self-defense. They can't elongate themselves to long range, but they can utilize them to protect themselves at closer range. That being said, they don't require protecting because they're even tankier than a standard Cerberus, which means your standard Cerberus, if it requires concentrated fire from Plasmite Soulstite, an Infernal Cerberus would require saturated fire from antimatter weaponry, which, as a general rule of thumb, members of the Demon Legion aren't wholly physical. They aren't wholly matter. They are largely matter, and they're largely part matter, part magical. So as a result, something like an antimatter rifle will do roughly 50% of the total quote-unquote damage that it would do to a being that is wholly matter. And when you get to an Infernal Cerberus, it's that kind of situation is amplified to an insane degree, you know. They do a very suboptimal effect. If you use antimatter on any Archdemon, Greater Demon, or Lesser Demon, it's going to annihilate them. Even like a standard Cerberus. But throwing it at an Infernal Cerberus is going to do basically nothing. So after Demon Lords, we have Demon Princes and Princesses, and then Demon Kings and Queens. And it's specifically with Demon Kings and Queens that we see the Apocalypse Cerberus. And oftentimes when these massive behemoths that easily stand on the same level as Warhammer 40k Imperator class Titans, which are roughly the size of the Statue of Liberty, might I add, it requires the full attention of a Siritan Calamity. The guys who are essentially equivalent to a supernova if a Calamity candidate is a nuclear bomb. Apocalypse Cerberuses are even bigger. Like I said, they're like the size of the Statue of Liberty. They have the same tentacles around the ankles that an Infernal does. They're still capable of firing laser beams from their mouths, essentially, just like the standard Cerberus and Infernal. They're even tankier, and they possess these weird pod-like growths all up and down their back. And what these pods are is basically a flap of, or 4 separate flaps of skin that kind of stick together with a mucus that works sort of like liquid concrete. And it generates a very volatile gel inside of it. And when these gels are either damaged or the Apocalypse Cerberus wishes to use them, it will essentially fire this gel out of the 4 flaps of skin like a mortar and just fire it off into the air, and it'll slowly arc down. And when this gel comes into physical contact with anything, the shock of this kind of mixes whatever chemicals are in this gel, resulting in a nuclear explosive like detonation. You know, it's not obviously a nuclear bomb, but it has the same yield. They're in megatons. It's essentially like 15, 20 megaton explosives when these things hit. And there are thousands of these sacks. And essentially, we're just going to call them buds, because they look like plant buds. You know, and there are thousands of these things. So not only do they have laser beams that are capable of easily melting their way through inch-thick corrodium plating, which is something that not very many things can claim to do, Keep in mind that the majority of Ciritan starships, the ones that are armored in corrodium hulls or corrodium armor plating, it's usually a half-inch thick hull or armor plating. I keep on saying hull, that's not true. Half-inch thick armor plating of corrodium on larger starships. Obviously, the biggest ones, they have far thicker, but like, there are very, very few things that can punch through a half-inch thick armor plate of corrodium. There's even less that can punch through an inch thick. And Apocalypse Cerberuses can do that with their Hellfire laser beam thing. They are insanely fast. They're capable of hitting Mach speeds in incredibly short amount of time. Like, when you get to things of that sheer ridiculous of scale, you obviously think there is absolutely no way that thing can move fast. It's not possible. It's inconceivable that something... Holy fuck, it just broke the sound barrier. It's that type of situation. Like, there is literally no way that it can do this, but it does it because fuck you. Because largely, again, when we get to the Apocalypse Cerberus, it's almost non-material. You know, it's not really matter-based at that point. It's mostly just a magical being. And as a result, because it's primarily magical, it's capable of violating the laws of physics that would normally state that something the size of the Statue of fucking Liberty should not be able to break the sound barrier on its own in less than 2 seconds flat. You know, it should not be able to do that, but it can do that for some fucking reason. Now, you would think, okay, so it uses the tentacles for self-defense. It fires off the laser beams at anything that it considers to be a worthy threat for those types of things. It has enough physical strength to quite literally destroy almost any fortification that is put in front of it. And it has those little plant buds on its back that fire essentially 15-20 megaton bombs as artillery shells. Well, obviously, if you target the buds, you could just blow up the Cerberus. Unfortunately, that doesn't work. The Ciritan Empire has tried extensively to find different ways to deal with Apocalypse Cerberuses. They've had 2 incursions, and both times the Ciritan Empire suffered such insane losses that they were like, we need to focus a lot of research on figuring out how to kill these things, because if they come back, I don't know if we can stop it. And so their bright idea was, okay, shoot the buds. They're clearly megaton yield explosives. Just blow it up from its back. Yeah, they did that. They detonated one, which chain reactioned all of the other ones. And when the smoke cleared, the Cerberus appeared to have sustained no damage and appeared to be even more pissed off than it already was, which was an impressive feat in of itself. So it's completely immune to the explosives that are quite literally strapped to its back that it fires. Now, an important thing is that Apocalypse Cerberuses are classified as a Demon King or Demon Queen class demon, but they don't actually hold the rank of Demon King or Queen. They're considered to be as roughly, if you squint hard, as powerful. And oftentimes a calamity has to be deployed to deal with a Demon King or Queen. However, when we're talking about just demons in general, and specifically when we get to Demon Lord rank, it's not really species of demon that are all, you know, this specific species of the Demon Legion is Demon Lord rank, or this one is Demon Prince, or this one is Demon King. It's more so individual demons who have obtained a level of power, and again, within the Demon Legion, it's might makes right. If you're the most powerful son of a bitch, people are going to follow you, because otherwise you can just annihilate them, because that's how their society works. So, Archdemon species, they largely only go up to Archdemon. Beyond that are individual demons that have gained enough power to be recognized as one of those ranks. Either they're a Demon Lord, they're now a Demon Prince / Princess, or they're a Demon King / Queen. And typically when a demon prince or princess appears, it's all hands on deck. Like, we need to deploy a calamity at that point, because that's what's going to be required to deal with these things. Then there's demon kings and queens, which are on a whole nother level of stupid, that deploying a calamity isn't enough. They have to deploy all of the calamities, and even then, it's not guaranteed that they're going to win, because there are essentially very high-ranking members of the demon kings and queens that have very large amounts of power, and three of them you will recognize because they are prevalent in religion. These three demon kings, well, two demon kings and single demon queen, is Lucifer, the demon king, Satan, the demon queen, and Beelzebub, the demon king. Now, one important thing to know is that these aren't your stereotypical Lucifer, Satan, and Beelzebub. Beelzebub is seen as the Lord of Flies, and within Shadow Legacies, he kinda has that kind of focus, but he's largely not. Let's just put it this way. Beelzebub is considered to be the third strongest of all demon kings and queens. That's why I brought him up. Satan is the strongest, followed by Lucifer in second place. Beelzebub managed to invade reality one time. And during that one time, the Siritan Empire deployed all 8 of their Siritan calamities. And they barely got the job done. Like, half of them were critically injured to the point of near death. Duran actually died, but they brought his ass back somehow. And the rest got out kind of okay. And it was considered, like, even though they forced Beelzebub back into the demon realm, it was considered a complete failure of a mission. Like, these are our strongest warriors. They had fucking Duran there, and they got their asses handed to them. Now, when we go into the Siritan natural disasters, we'll come back to this specific topic and why this specific topic is very important when it comes to calamities and understanding just how powerful the calamities actually are. So, as a result, if it's one of the heavy-hitting, high-ranking demon kings or queens, it's basically like, hold on to your ass and pray that at the end of it you still have an ass type of situation, you know, because they're going to send in the calamities. They're going to probably get their asses handed to them, but they'll probably force them back. Beyond that is what is known as the Demon God, and thank Christ for the Siritan Empire, or I guess thank the Siritan Emperor for the Siritan Empire. There hasn't been a demon god in a long time. And the demon god is a very powerful individual. It's basically somebody that can make all of these demon kings and queens kind of bend their knee to them. And it requires a very special and a very powerful type of demon to get this job done. So now that we've kind of covered a lot of the different demons, which we didn't really cover that many, I suppose, we can get to how demons invade. And they invade via a Hell's Gate. And basically think a Minecraft nether portal on fucking steroids. That's a Hell's Gate. You know, it's made of a very jagged, rocky, black substance that looks similar to obsidian, but it's definitely not obsidian. They're not sure what it is, and they can't really seem to interact with it. They believe that it's somehow magical in origin, but that it's magical in origin in such a way that only demons can truly interact with it. The only purpose that this frame serves is to create the Hell's Gate proper. It's the frame of it. And so basically, the size of the Hell's Gate is completely and utterly random. No matter what entity is fueling a Hell's Gate, the size is completely and utterly random. It could be tiny, the size of like a mouse hole, or it could be the size of the Empire State Building. You know? Like, they can be any different size. But this is the part that specifically is very important, the type of demon that is powering it. Basically, a specific demon has to go, okay, we've kind of sat around twiddling our thumbs for long enough. I think it's time that we invade the demon realm. And they basically start weaving this strange, rocky, black substance into the form of a portal, which again, the size is completely randomized outside of the control of the demon creating it. And it's specifically the tier of demon that is making it. So if an archdemon is making a Hell's Gate, this means that any number of lesser and greater demons are capable of going through the Hell's Gate. And so long as that archdemon is there, fueling the Hell's Gate itself, the portal will remain open until either it is destroyed through outside means, which the Saracen Empire certainly does have the capability of destroying Hell's Gates, or the archdemon in question, or whatever demon is fueling it, runs out of gas, basically. And at that point, the Hell's Gate will collapse, and having their connection to the demon realm severed, any demons that are on the other side will slowly start to weaken further and further until they just outright die and fade away from reality back into the demon realm. An important thing to know is that if a species is recently brought into the Demon Legion, they're not considered to be demonic yet. They're working with the Demon Legion, so they are a demon to a certain extent, but they're not demonic yet. And as a result, when you kill them, they stay dead. However, species that have been in the Demon Legion for a long time and have been within the demon realm for a very long time, or the underworld, I suppose, they're basically like Warhammer 40k demons. You know, you can kill them within mainstream reality, but they'll just come back within the underworld and will be perfectly fine. And then they can just waddle their ass through another Hell's Gate, and they're back in the material world, or the mainstream reality, with seemingly no ill-adverse effects whatsoever. As a result, they're very difficult to deal with, especially if it's a particularly powerful one, because it's like, yeah, maybe if they had the proper means at the time, all of the calamities could have killed Beelzebub, but Beelzebub has been around for an insanely long time, so he would just resurrect back inside of the underworld and then just be able to go back through. But an important thing to know is that the highest rank of Hell's Gate that typically opens up is that of Demon Lord, which means you have lesser demons, greater demons, and archdemons coming through there. When it comes to demon princes and princesses and demon kings and queens, it's again drawing connections to Warhammer 40k. It's kind of like the Chaos Gods' great game, you know? They're constantly fucking with one another. You know, they can't kill each other, and they can't do anything of substantial, like, damage, but they're just constantly fucking with one another. So typically a demon prince or princess or a demon king and queen just simply doesn't really give enough of a fuck to create a Hell's Gate that will allow their lessers through. Now, an important thing to know is that if it's a particularly high-ranking demon within a specific rank, i.e. Archdemon, Demon Lords, and so on and so forth, that means that their own fellow rank is capable of going through. So let's say the most powerful of all Demon Lords is currently making a Hell's Gate. That means at that point, all the other Demon Lords are also technically capable of going through. But realistically, one, maybe two, maybe three, if you're really lucky, are actually going to be able to get through. The rest of them will kind of try to go through, and then reality will basically deny them access, kind of like a rubber band, and it'll shoot them back into the underworld. And they go, well, better luck next time, and go back to doing whatever the hell it was that they were doing. When Beelzebub came through, for whatever reason, Satan, Lucifer, and Beelzebub, the top three, the fourth ranking demon king or queen, isn't really on the same level as them. For whatever reason, they decided, yeah, we need to fuck with the mainstream reality for whatever reason, and it was actually Satan that had created the Hell's Gate. Lucifer was just slightly too powerful, but Beelzebub was just powerful enough to get through that Hell's Gate and caused a right proper fucking of all of the calamities, as I said earlier. The worst case scenario is known as a Hell's Gate cascade. And this occurs when a demon is powerful enough to be widely recognized as the demon god, decides that I'm going to kick all of the demons squarely in the ass, and now we're going to fight as an actual cohesive legion, and I myself am going to open the Hell's Gate. When a demon is strong enough to be officially recognized as a demon god, they can create the Hell's Gate themselves and go through it themselves, and all other demon ranks are capable of going through it as well. And the Hell's Gate will not shut until the demon king or until the demon god is killed. At which point, again, that weakening effect until they eventually die will occur. This has only ever happened once. And the Siritan Empire got their asses handed to them so thoroughly that the gods themselves intervened and basically had to eradicate reality and recreate it just to force the demon god back enough where they did enough damage and managed to kill him after essentially like a tactical squad of gods entered the underworld and fought the demon god. At which point they killed him, and there hasn't been a situation like that since. And that was back during the 4th Siritan Empire. If you remember, the 4th Siritan Empire was the strongest out of them all. The biggest out of them all. And that's when the demon god struck. Since then, we're currently on the 33rd or 34th Siritan Empire. And there hasn't been one since. Thank God. Thank the Siritan Emperor. Who's also the majority of the time a god. So, I guess, yeah, thank God. So, yeah, that is the Demon Legion. I guess we can kind of go over the demon realm or the underworld real quickly. I kind of went over it in the State of Reality episode. There's really not a lot to say. It's kind of like, imagine the kind of, like, design of hell from Doom, and you kind of get it. You know, it's a lot of barren soil, fire, brimstone everywhere, granite for some fucking reason. You know, it's just a very unpleasant place to be that just goes on in every direction infinitely. You know, it's as if the idea of those idiotic flat earthers were right for the demon realm or the underworld, and it just goes out for infinity. You know, you will never, if you walk directly north at all times, like even using a compass, you will never eventually come back to the point that you started at. You will just keep going and going and going and going. And you'll never stop because there's never a stopping point. It just goes on forever. It's infinite in every single direction. North, south, east, west, each of the in-betweens, up, down, any direction you can possibly think of. It's infinite. You know, you could dig down, and it doesn't matter how far you dig down. You can go like 1,000,000 miles dug downward in a tube, and it'll just keep going. It'll just keep going forever. And as a result, you either need to find your entry point again, which at that point has probably been swarmed by demons, or you need to create your own exit point, at which point, who the fuck knows where you're gonna be? Like, you'll probably never get back to the Siritan Empire at that point. But, so, yeah. That's the Demon Legion. Typically, one thing I forgot to add is that typically when an invasion actually occurs, there's no tactic. That's the important thing about the Demon Legion. Like, it's literally the same level of tactics that you have with Warhammer 40k orcs. You know, it's literally, you see that group of enemies, charge them, and do not stop charging them until they're dead. That's their most complex strategies. Because they don't need a complex strategy, you know? high-ranking demons that are deployed, yeah, they'll probably use actual tactics, but if we're just talking about the cannon fodder, like lesser and greater demons, there's no tactic there. Just keep on throwing them at the problem until it's no longer a problem. There's literally infinite amounts of them. We don't ever have to worry about their numbers running out. Just keep on throwing them, you know? And so as a result, trying to defend against a Hell's Gate, there's not really any proper way of doing it. It's bring as many guns and as many artillery and maybe even some orbital bombardment and saturated orbital barrages. And just kind of deal with it until somebody can get to the Hell's Gate and destroy the frame. And then once that happens, you don't really have to worry about it anymore. And the odds of them creating a new Hell's Gate anywhere remotely near where you are so infinitesimal, you might as well say it's impossible for them to recreate a Hell's Gate at that location again. So, yeah. That is the Demon Legion in a nutshell, as well as the proper Demon Tribe. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Once again, I don't really know what we're going to talk about the next episode. I think we might do Florians. I'm kind of vibing with the idea of doing Florians, but I also really want to do the Calamities still, man. I want to get to Duran. I want to get to Mikaela. I want to get to some of the big heavy hitters, the big deciders in the Cerriton Empire. So we'll have to see. It's going to be one of those two. I might make a poll in the community Discord and see what people want between those two options. But so yeah. Tomorrow for you guys, we have the 7 Days to Die episode coming out, as well as on Friday. And then Saturday, we have our RimWorld series, our RimWorld stream, which I am not looking forward to at all, because I get to clean up the mess that I've created, and let's just say I rage quitted last time. And then we have Sunday, which is our Sunday Night Live, where I choose a random game and we'll vibe with it. Also, as a reminder, I just realized I forgot to do sneak peek today. Damn it. I really need to get back into that. On the community Discord, you can talk with me pretty much 24/7. I'm available whenever, as well as a few of the other members that are on there that are all right proper lads and ladies. Lads and ladies, there we go. You can even game with me. If I have a game that you are playing, I might end up jamming with you just for a while, because fuck it, why not? I need more friends anyway. I need more online friends, I really do. Not only that, but you'll get access to the ever so rare private Discord stream, where if you want more content like this, especially like our Sunday Night Live, every once in a blue moon, I'll just get in a streaming mood, and I'll just record an episode, or I'll just start streaming in one of the voice chats, so you can get access to that, as well as, when I can remember to actually fucking do them, our sneak peek, which basically means if you want to see these episodes early, as in when I am recording them, then you guys can come out and watch them live, once again, in the Discord voice chats. That's the only place that you can find them, and you can watch them ahead of everybody else. There should be in the description of all of the videos now a link to the Discord, as well as on my channel's homepage. There is a link to the community Discord that should be working. If it doesn't work for whatever reason, as per usual, put a comment in the video saying, hey, your links don't work, and I will get it proper fixed right away. But yeah, you can click on that link and join the community Discord and get those somewhat generic perks. There will be more perks, but for right now, there's just not enough of them for me to incentivize more perks. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you guys are looking forward to the future episodes. Until then, guys, see ya.